Have you ever pondered who was more terrifying, Attila the Hun or Genghis Khan? Let's travel back some 1600 years to the harsh steppes of Eurasia, where a child named Attila was born around AD 406. He was birthed into the nomadic and fierce Hunnic tribe, a culture steeped in unique customs and traditions. These traditions, often brutal, were the crucible that shaped Attila's early life. From a young age, he was inculcated with the ethos of survival of the fittest, a rule that permeated every facet of Hunnic life. This world, where strength was revered and weakness scorned, would mold Attila into a formidable leader. A leader who in the fullness of time would become synonymous with terror and devastation. Attila's upbringing in a world where only the strongest survived forged a leader who would shake the foundations of civilization. Attila's rise to power was as swift as it was ruthless. In the early 5th century, the Hunnic Empire was a fearsome dominion stretching across Eurasia. This vast territory was handed down to Attila and his brother, Bleda, by their uncle, King Rugila. The two young men, barely out of their youth, were thrust into a world of power, war and diplomacy. They were now the joint rulers of an empire that struck fear into the hearts of even the mightiest Roman emperors. The early years of their reign were characterized by a unique display of unity. Attila and Bleda, though different in temperament, worked together to consolidate their power. They strengthened the Hunnic army, negotiated treaties, and even launched successful campaigns against the Eastern Roman Empire. Their joint rule seemed to be a promising start, hinting at a prosperous era for the Huns. However, the harmony wouldn't last. Bleda's life was cut short under mysterious circumstances. Some whispered of a hunting accident, others hinted at a darker cause. The most persistent rumor, though unproven, hinted at fratricide. Many believed that Attila, with his unquenchable thirst for power, had orchestrated his brother's untimely demise. With Bleda's death, the shared rule of the Hunnic Empire ended abruptly. Attila, now the sole ruler, wasted no time in establishing his authority. He was a leader who ruled with an iron fist, his decisions unchallenged and his orders carried out without question. He was ruthless yet strategic, brutal yet charismatic. He was a leader who inspired fear and respect in equal measure. Attila's ascension to power is a tale of ambition, ruthlessness and intrigue. It's a story that reveals the darker side of power and the lengths to which one would go to attain it. As we delve deeper into Attila's life, we begin to see the man behind the legend. A man who, for all his brutality, was a product of his time and circumstances. With Bleda out of the picture, nothing stood between Attila and absolute power. And with the reins of the empire firmly in his hands, Attila unleashed a reign of terror unparalleled in history. It was a reign of conquest, a reign of destruction, and a reign of dread that seemed to know no bounds. Attila, the scourge of God, was at the height of his power, and his thirst for domination was insatiable. Attila's most infamous campaigns were directed against the Eastern and Western Roman empires, the twin pillars of civilization at the time. The Eastern Empire, with its wealth and splendor, was the first to feel the wrath of Attila. The Hunnic armies, like a force of nature, descended upon the Eastern Roman provinces, leaving a trail of devastation in their wake. Cities were laid to waste, the land was scorched, and the people bore the brunt of Attila's wrath. The Eastern Roman Empire, once a beacon of power and sophistication, was brought to its knees. The Emperor Theodosius II was forced to sign a treaty, ceding vast territories and agreeing to pay an annual tribute of gold to Attila. It was a humiliating capitulation, but one that was necessary to stave off further destruction. But Attila was not done. The Western Roman Empire, with its decadence and corruption, was next in line. Once again, the Hunnic armies swept across the land like a storm, laying waste to everything in their path. The very name Attila became a byword for terror and destruction. Attila's tactics were as brutal as they were effective. He used psychological warfare to instill fear in his enemies, often resorting to terrifying displays of power to demoralize the opposition. It was said that before launching an attack, Attila would order the heads of captured enemy soldiers to be mounted on stakes, creating a gruesome spectacle for the besieged city's inhabitants. The message was clear: surrender or face a fate worse than death. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of Attila's reign was the mass destruction and slaughter his armies left in their wake. Entire cities were reduced to rubble, their inhabitants either killed or enslaved. The land was rendered desolate, with entire regions depopulated. It was a reign of terror that left a lasting scar on the face of Europe. And yet, despite the brutality and bloodshed, Attila's reign was marked by a strange sort of order. The Hunnic Empire, despite its barbaric reputation, was a well-oiled military machine with a strict code of law and a surprisingly efficient administration. It was a paradox that baffled many, a savage empire that was, in many ways, a model of efficiency and discipline. Attila's reign was a time of darkness, a time when the world trembled at the mention of his name. But it was also a time of transformation, a time when the old world order was being overturned, and a new one was emerging from the ashes. Attila, the Scourge of God, was the harbinger of this new era, an era marked by upheaval, chaos, and ultimately change. Even the mightiest fall, and Attila was no exception. The Scourge of God, as he was ominously known, met his end rather unexpectedly in the year 453 AD, on the very night of his wedding. A night that should have been filled with jubilation and merriment was suddenly transformed into a spectacle of death and despair. It was a demise as mystifying as the man himself, with theories abound trying to decipher the cause. Some whispered of an assassination plot, a treacherous stab in the dark by those who feared his reign of terror. Others proposed a less dramatic but equally tragic theory, that Attila, the mighty Hunnic warrior, succumbed to a mundane yet deadly foe: alcohol. Indeed, the theory of accidental alcohol poisoning seems to hold some weight. Historical accounts suggest that Attila was a man of indulgence, particularly fond of his drink. On his wedding night, it's plausible that he may have overindulged, perhaps in celebration or perhaps to numb the pressures of his brutal legacy. However, the theory of assassination cannot be dismissed either. Attila, with his ruthless conquests and brutal rule, had made a fair share of enemies. It seems plausible that one of them could have seized the opportunity to rid the world of him. The lack of a clear successor and the subsequent fracturing of the Hunnic Empire after his death lend some credence to this theory. But regardless of the cause, the fact remains that Attila, the formidable Hunnic king, the Scourge of God, fell that night. His death was as sudden as it was unexpected, leaving the world in a state of shocked relief. His empire crumbled, his armies disbanded, and the terror he instilled began to fade. With Attila's demise, the world breathed a sigh of relief, but the echoes of his reign still lingered. The spectre of his brutal rule, the tales of his conquests, and the mystery of his death have etched Attila's name into the annals of history, where he continues to both fascinate and terrify us to this day. In the annals of history, few names invoke as much fear as Attila the Hun and Genghis Khan. Two giants who rode from the east, they shook the world to its core with their brutal conquests and reigns of terror. But how do these two titans stack up against each other? Attila, known as the Scourge of God, led the Huns with absolute authority. His word was law, and he ruled with an iron fist. He was a master of psychological warfare, using fear as a weapon as potent as any sword. His military tactics were innovative and ruthless, often preferring to raze cities to the ground rather than leave them standing. On the other hand, Genghis Khan, the universal ruler, was a more pragmatic leader. He believed in meritocracy and promoted his officers based on their abilities rather than their lineage. His military strategies were grand, focusing on mobility and speed, using the formidable Mongol horsemen to outmaneuver his enemies. He was no less brutal than Attila, but he often spared the lives of artisans and skilled workers, seeing their value for his empire. The impacts of their reigns are still felt today. Attila's invasions weakened the Roman Empire, paving the way for its fall. His reign, however, was short-lived, and his empire quickly crumbled after his death. Genghis Khan, in contrast, established the largest contiguous land empire in history, and his descendants continued to rule vast territories for generations. As for who was more brutal, both were ruthless in their quest for power. Attila's notoriety comes from his scorched earth tactics and his penchant for destruction. Genghis Khan, while equally brutal, was perhaps more strategic in his violence, using it as a tool for expansion and control rather than simple destruction. Attila the Hun and Genghis Khan, two titans of history. Who was more terrifying? That, dear viewer, is for you to decide.